What just unfolded in Manhattan has sent shockwaves through political and financial circles alike. In a single day, District Attorney Alvin Bragg unsealed 47 indictments tied to Trump associates. Even Warren Buffett, a figure famously reluctant to wade into political prosecutions, issued a statement that rattled Wall Street. This is no longer a story about isolated misconduct. What's emerging instead is a tightly connected network of alleged financial wrongdoing, far more extensive than most people ever suspected. And what's been happening out of public view makes this even more explosive. Since taking office in January 2022, Alvin Bragg has carried the label of a reform-minded prosecutor. He was expected to prioritize violent crime and show leniency on lower-level offenses. For months, critics accused him of being weak, of allowing serious cases to slip through the cracks. Frustration wasn't limited to Republicans. Even members of his own party voiced concerns. But here's the twist. While the public assumed the Trump investigation had stalled, Bragg was quietly assembling something far bigger beneath the surface. Here's what's really unfolding behind these indictments. What began 3 years ago as a tightly focused probe into hush money payments has now exploded into something far larger. Federal facilities are tightening security. Secret Service teams are shifting into high alert. Major investment firms are holding emergency calls. All of this chaos stems from prosecutors uncovering what they describe as an unprecedented financial fraud operation in U.S. history. And at the center of it all, Trump's closest allies from the heart of his business empire. The timing could hardly be more damaging for Trump. Instead of locking in his 2025 priorities and laying the groundwork for a return to the White House, he's facing a legal firestorm. And this is where it takes a sharp turn. Investigators didn't stop at campaign finance issues. They traced offshore accounts, complex shell corporations, and financial paths allegedly connected to sanctioned Russian oligarchs. Records point to long-running tax schemes stretching back decades. Longtime loyalists, figures tied to Trump since the 1980s, are now being escorted out of luxury Park Avenue residences in full public view. Let's pause and be clear about one thing. These are not fringe players or loosely connected names. These are insiders, individuals who know the inner workings of the Trump organization, better than almost anyone. Turning back to the investigation itself, reports surfacing around October 23rd revealed just how rattled Trump's legal team had become. They blasted Bragg's case as a witch hunt on steroids, accusing prosecutors of blatant election interference. Those are not casual accusations. In essence, Trump's attorneys portrayed Bragg as a partisan operator, arguing the indictments were deliberately timed as Trump prepares for another run at power. And this wasn't said behind closed doors. Trump took his anger public on Truth Social, leaving no doubt that his frustration with Bragg was boiling over. The announcement rippled through Republican circles, triggering a wave of uneasy questions. If a Democratic prosecutor in solidly blue Manhattan could line up sweeping indictments against an incoming president's inner circle, what did that signal for everyone else racing to land roles in the new administration? And this isn't uncharted territory when it comes to Trump and prosecutors. History shows that enforcement pressure tends to spike the moment investigators sense weakness. When Trump or those around him expose a vulnerability or leave a trail of documents behind, prosecutors move fast. That pattern has repeated itself again and again. Look back at the Mueller investigation. Paul Manafort and Rick Gates were pulled in over undisclosed millions, bank fraud, and conspiracy charges, a full-spectrum legal assault. Then came the Southern District of New York. They made it clear they had no patience for Michael Cohen's role in arranging hush money payments. Prosecutor Jeffrey Berman ensured that Michael Cohen faced real prison time. And it didn't stop there. Letitia James later took aim at the Trump Organization in civil court after uncovering evidence of exaggerated asset valuations. That case ended with a staggering $454 million judgment. Even state-level prosecutors joined the effort. In Atlanta, Fani Willis drew heat for her RICO case, yet still secured multiple guilty pleas from Trump-linked figures. Now, it appears Alvin Bragg is taking that same strategy and pushing it into overdrive. The pattern is hard to ignore. Loyalty offers no protection. You can defend Trump nonstop, stand by him publicly, and fight his battles. But the instant prosecutors uncover leverage, they'll either pressure you to cooperate or move straight to charges. So, how did these associates land squarely in Bragg's sights? It all comes down to money, an enormous amount of it. According to an October 26th Politico report, investigators uncovered roughly 200 shell companies spread across 7 different countries. These entities weren't operating legitimate businesses. Their sole purpose was to move cash, conceal assets, and sidestep tax obligations. Here's how the operation allegedly worked. Executives tied to the Trump Organization would overstate property values when applying for loans, then undervalue those same assets for tax filings. But that was only the surface layer. Investigators also found bogus consulting contracts, non-existent employees, and invoices for work that was never performed. Funds reportedly moved through Delaware-based LLCs, then into Caribbean financial institutions, onward to Cyprus, and ultimately into accounts held by Russian nationals. As the probe stretched into its 3rd year, new red flags emerged. There were allegations of witness tampering, shredded records, and the use of encrypted messaging platforms. Publicly, Trump's legal team dismissed the case as a political witch hunt. Behind closed doors, panic was setting in. Sources familiar with the defense say they anticipated indictments. What caught them off guard was the scale. 47 people named at once. This was the point where Warren Buffett reportedly grew uneasy. Buffett prioritizes stability, orderly markets, and institutional predictability. Being linked to an administration whose business leadership is facing widespread criminal exposure is not a scenario he welcomes. That kind of uncertainty is poison for the economic climate he prefers. Then Bragg made a move Trump's team insists crossed a line. He began coordinating closely with federal authorities and overseas law enforcement agencies. Contacts were reportedly made with officials in Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. According to an MSNBC report, that international cooperation produced banking records, revealing hundreds of millions of dollars in unreported income. When Trump learned how far the investigation had gone, he reacted furiously. To him, targeting his finances signals weakness. Bringing foreign governments into the mix, that's viewed as outright betrayal. In Trump's world, any prosecutor willing to chase money across borders is immediately branded a globalist enemy. That reality boxed Trump into an impossible situation. On one hand, he depends on these longtime business allies to keep his empire running while he occupies the White House. The Trump Organization doesn't operate on autopilot. Its senior executives are essential people who've been at his side for decades, who understand every transaction, every property, and every complex financial structure. But on the other hand, the political consequences are brutal. Entering a presidency with your entire business leadership facing criminal indictments creates enormous conflicts of interest. Foreign governments begin questioning whether they're negotiating with a stable administration or something far more compromised. Financial markets grow jittery each time another associate is taken into custody. The real dilemma lies in how to respond, addressing the indictments at all risks, conceding that there may be substance behind them, and implicit acknowledgement of potential financial wrongdoing. And that leaves Trump trapped. He can stand by his associates, tying himself to their alleged misconduct and effectively assuming responsibility for decades of questionable financial practices, a move that could devastate his business empire. Or he can cut them loose, which would amount to admitting that the people he trusted for 40 years were criminals all along. Either path carries consequences he can't easily escape. Either outcome paints Trump in an ugly light, either as someone who consistently misjudges character or as someone who is deeply entangled in the very schemes now under scrutiny. It's an impossible position, and it's exactly the kind of pressure prosecutors are known for creating. They force Trump into an unavoidable choice. Loyalty versus survival, business interests versus political ambitions. And whichever route he takes, they meticulously document his response, knowing that self-preservation almost always wins. They don't hesitate to frame those reactions as indicators of consciousness of guilt. The fallout has sent shockwaves through Trump's transition team. With 47 longtime associates facing indictments and potential decades behind bars, everyone in Trump's orbit is now looking over their shoulder. Moderate Republicans hoping for stability and routine governance are increasingly anxious about being linked to an expanding criminal probe. At the same time, hardline MAGA supporters are convinced Bragg is part of a so-called deep state plot and insist Trump should simply issue blanket pardons on day one. Tensions escalated further when Warren Buffett, one of the most respected figures in American business, broke his long-standing silence on legal and political controversies. The Oracle of Omaha had deliberately avoided public commentary throughout the election cycle. But according to an October 27th Wall Street Journal report, Buffett convened an emergency call with Berkshire Hathaway's board, delivering a blunt warning. When financial fraud reaches a systemic scale, he cautioned, it rarely stops with those already charged. There's almost always more buried beneath the surface. And when someone as measured and cautious as Buffett starts sounding alarms about structural risk, it's a clear sign that the situation is far more serious than it appears. The scene at the Manhattan federal courthouse has been unlike anything witnessed since the era of high-profile mob prosecutions. In a single morning, FBI agents carried out coordinated search warrants at 19 separate locations. According to CBS News, investigators hauled away 400 boxes of records, seized 50 computers, and recovered more than $10 million in cash from various safe deposit boxes. Court officials were forced to open additional processing rooms just to keep up with the flood of defendants being arraigned. And during those first hearings, the judge made it clear he wasn't pulling any punches. The moment dealt a serious blow to Trump's public narrative. Judge Juan Merchant, no stranger to Trump Organization cases, stated that the evidence outlined a calculated, long-running effort to defraud federal and state tax authorities, financial institutions, and insurance companies over decades. Translated out of legal language, this wasn't a clerical mistake or an accounting oversight, it was alleged organized fraud dressed up in boardroom attire. Legal analysts are pointing out that indictments of this magnitude haven't been seen since the sweeping RICO prosecutions against New York's 5 crime families in the 1980s. Even Andrew McCarthy, a former federal prosecutor who often defends Trump on Fox News, raised eyebrows during an appearance on Laura Ingraham's program. He admitted that if even half of the allegations are accurate, the case could rank as the largest corporate fraud prosecution in American history. Let that sink in for a moment. This is the kind of scandal that doesn't just damage reputations, it wipes out entire business empires. And notably, that warning didn't come from a liberal critic, it came from a conservative legal voice speaking on Fox News. Alan Dershowitz, a constitutional scholar who has defended Trump in the past, noted that the decision to invoke RICO statutes fundamentally alters the stakes. When prosecutors reach for racketeering laws originally crafted to dismantle mafia organizations, they're no longer targeting isolated individuals. They're alleging that the entire operation functions as a criminal enterprise. And when legal commentators across the ideological spectrum start using words like unprecedented and catastrophic, that's the signal to pay close attention. So let's unpack what a 47-defendant indictment of this scale actually means, because this goes far beyond courtroom drama. The ripple effects touch the economy, governance, and the stability of institutions themselves. The first impact is political, and it's immediate. Trump is already under intense scrutiny from multiple legal fronts, and this development further undermines his ability to govern without distraction. Republican senators are reportedly uneasy about confirming cabinet nominees who could be drawn into the investigation, injecting even more strain into the process. Democrats, meanwhile, see an opening. They're prepared to argue that claims of draining the swamp ring hollow when Trump's own business operation is alleged to be a criminal enterprise backed, they'll note, by 47 separate indictments. This becomes Exhibit 1 in the case that Trump's reform promises lack credibility if his own organization can't pass legal muster. Expect these indictments to be referenced relentlessly in floor speeches on Sunday political shows and throughout the 2026 midterm campaign cycle. Images of Trump-linked figures in handcuffs escorted into federal vehicles are the kind of visuals political opponents rarely waste. Now consider the economic implications. Warren Buffett didn't choose to speak out casually. When he raises alarms about systemic risk, institutional investors pay attention. Reports already suggest hedge funds are discreetly reducing any exposure tied to Trump-affiliated ventures. International banks, for their part, are reassessing relationships connected to Trump Organization properties, signaling that the financial fallout may only be beginning. Buffett likely concluded that staying quiet was no longer an option. Remaining silent in the face of what he believed to be large-scale financial misconduct would have exposed Berkshire Hathaway to even greater reputational risk. By speaking up now, he's insulating shareholders from potential spillover effects. More importantly, he's signaling that this isn't ordinary market volatility or a temporary disruption. It's alleged criminal behavior with the potential to ripple across the broader financial system. This moment also places a glaring spotlight on a deeper question. Does the rule of law truly apply to everyone? At its core, the issue is whether a president's business allies can engage in long-running systematic fraud without facing consequences. If the answer turns out to be yes, it fundamentally reshapes how corporate America operates. Executives across the country are watching closely. Many are quietly asking themselves, if Trump's inner circle could allegedly evade hundreds of millions in taxes, why am I playing by the rules? Why am I spending heavily on compliance and oversight? That's how a two-tier system takes root, one where political proximity outweighs legal accountability. Alvin Bragg has never been comfortable with that kind of imbalance. He campaigned on the principle that justice should be applied evenly regardless of status or influence. Allowing Trump associates to escape charges for conduct that would land anyone else in court would amount to a serious breach of that promise, and it would set a dangerous precedent, inviting future administrations to treat the justice system less like an institution and more like a shield for loyal insiders. The stakes of this case extend far beyond Trump and his circle. At its core, it's about shaping the rules of American business and justice for years to come. Every time prosecutors like Alvin Bragg hold powerful interests accountable, it reinforces the foundations of our democracy. Consider the implications. If 47 executives can allegedly defraud banks and the IRS for decades, what's to stop the next group from doing the same? If political connections can shield people from prosecution, how do we prevent another generation of opportunists from buying influence and immunity? These actions don't vanish once Trump leaves office. They become part of the president, the new normal, and that's dangerous. The rule of law only functions when enforcement is consistent, when even those in power are held accountable. When that principle erodes, democracy itself weakens. Looking toward the 2026 midterms, the ramifications are clear. If voters see Trump's entire business empire under criminal indictment and multiple associates facing prison time, it's a serious liability for Republicans. Voters tend to reject chaos and corruption. They reward competence and integrity, two qualities Trump is currently failing to demonstrate. Democrats are poised to exploit this narrative. They'll argue for honest, accountable government and insist that systemic fraud and criminal enterprises disguised as legitimate companies can no longer be tolerated. That message could resonate widely, even drawing moderate Republicans disillusioned by decades of alleged misconduct. Here's the bottom line. Alvin Bragg just leveled 47 indictments against Trump's closest allies, and Warren Buffett's warning about systemic financial risk has markets on edge. This isn't simply about campaign finance violations anymore. It's a question of whether large-scale financial crime at the highest levels gets punished or effectively rewarded in America. If Trump's associates escape accountability despite overwhelming evidence of tax fraud and money laundering, it sends a chilling message. The law no longer applies equally. We would be entering a world where power and political connections determine who can steal with impunity. This goes beyond Trump's business troubles. It's about whether our justice system truly delivers equal protection under the law, or whether wealth and influence override accountability. Keep a close eye on this story. As more evidence surfaces and additional associates face judges, the coming weeks will be decisive. The stakes have never been higher, the evidence never clearer, and the outcome never more uncertain.